Everyone knows that something is wrong with modern relationships. Marriage rates are collapsing, birth rates are collapsing, anxiety, depression, loneliness are all skyrocketing. And men and women don't trust each other. Families are crumbling, and people are people are substituting real intimacy with screens, apps, porn, and AI. But here's the question. Nobody truly asked this, but how did we get here? Tonight, we're going to trace the evolution of feminism, not through slogans, not through political ideology, not through emotion, but through economics, incentives, social engineerings, and outcomes. Because when you follow the incentives, when you follow the power, and when you follow the money, you discover something that might be uncomfortable for some of you. Feminism wasn't a movement to free women. It was a strategy to reshape society, and it succeeded. But the results were not empowerment, they were division, exploitation, and isolation disguised and presented as progress. So stay with me to the end because when you see the full picture, you'll never look at modern gender politics in the same way again. Now, let's say you're new to my channel and you consider yourself a feminist and you have political values that align with what you know as feminism. If that's the case, then you really want to hear this breakdown because this is not a political channel and my interest isn't in changing anybody's politics. So, what you're going to find is that your values of equality and opportunity for who you feel may be a marginalized or oppressed uh, group is being used to control you politically and economically. So, if I were you, I'd want to know how that's being done. You might not agree with every point I make here. And in fact, even those who are more conservative, any side of the political aisle, you're probably going to find some disagreement with me in this video at some point. That's going to be a normal thing. Okay. But at the end of the breakdown, you will see the truth. I can promise you that. You will see the truth and you'll know how the values of what sometimes well-meaning people are being used to control and enslave you. All right. And once you see it, then you can decide what you're going to do about it. All right. So welcome to my live stream. Okay. This is going to be the challenge I'm going to have in this video isn't getting through all my notes. Okay. So I went down this pathway, went down this rabbit hole, and it just kept going. Right. So I'm going to try to do this in an hour or so. We'll see. If you guys like this, and if you like the information I'm presenting, then let me know in the comments later. All right. Because I can do a more polished, cleaned up series on feminism, like a multi-part series, if you guys like this. But of course, if people don't care that much and the algorithms don't care when that are based on what people view, well, then why would I put that effort in? So you have to let me know. Okay, if you like what by the end, if you like the information I'm presenting and if you think that it should be cleaned up so that it could potentially get out to a more massive audience, then just let me know. All right, so there's that. And speaking of algorithms, so I'm actually going to do a video on this here in the near future, but the algorithms are not friendly to channels like mine, okay? Because I don't follow social narratives. And because of that, I need your help. So if you do like the video, if you're new here, please throw a subscribe, like. I know everybody on YouTube asks for that, but the reality is I'm putting out life-saving information. I've coached thousands of men now at this point over the years, and my channel as well as my coaching programs have saved lives. Right? They've saved relationships for mostly the men I coach, but also for women. I shouldn't even say for mostly men because the men I'm coaching are dating women and in relationships with women, and those women, are getting the benefits of that. So if you could do that, me a solid and support the channel, I'd appreciate it. Coming up soon, for those who do know me better, okay, the Psychopath's Playbook. All right, it's a course that's going to teach the ordinary person, the nice guy, the good guy that keeps getting the short end of the stick. And even if you're not that guy necessarily, it'll help you sharpen your game. But it's going to teach you how to harness some of the traits that make psychopathic people very successful. All right. In dating and finance and business and in their life. Now, it's not good to be a psychopath, and I don't want you to become one. All right. But that just being one or not being one has more to do with just having empathy for others. So you can have empathy for others and not be the nice guy who gets walked on and who loses opportunity, who gets passed over, who gets ghosted after dates and all that sort of stuff. Right. You can be an empathetic guy. Okay. And a person who cares and connects with others in a healthy way and not be the guy who gets stepped on, right? And that's what this course is going to teach you. It's going to help you with that. It's an inner game course, and it's going to have actual tools and exercises and skills to help you develop those traits like masculine dominance, resilience, emotional self-control, focus, goal seeking, all those things, right? Handling conflicts even. And it'll be great. So that's going to drop at some point here. I'm just doing the announcements and in that phase. And if you're in my community and the community is free, you'll have access to that. And in fact, in the community is a free platform for you to use, gets us off of the censored platforms, and you can post your struggles, your problems, your goals, the things you're working on, and you get feedback. And it's pretty nice. So I hope to see you there too. That link is in the description of the video. All right. So now let's get into the meat and potatoes of our talk today. Okay. So we're going to break this down in waves. All right. So first wave feminism. Okay. This is 1800s. All right. To about the 1940s, about mid 1800s, we could say. All right. It's tough to say when, but we look at things economically speaking too. So when you look at things through an economic lens, resources drive society and behavior in a lot of ways. Okay. And I was going to do a little chart for this. You know what? I'm not going to do a chart. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to draw a chart. I'm going to draw a chart. Okay. I was going to do one and I didn't do it. So we're going to take out the trusty Sharpie here. That's stuck. All right. Okay. All right. So what you have is a circle. You like that? All right. So far, pretty good. So far, it's very complicated. Okay. That circle represents the economic system. All right. That you're in. Okay. Now, within that economic system, okay, you have, we could call the people in charge of that system the controllers. Okay. So you got people who have managed, they've been selected by society, they've been voted in, they've maybe nefariously taken power, they've done a number of things, right? Whatever it is, whether benevolent or whether they have good values or bad values. There's people in power who run the system, who direct the system. Now, this system is not run by a cabal. I mean, this is going to surprise some of you. Some of my viewers, this is where some of my fans will disagree with me. But remember, I worked in some of the deeper areas of government with a security clearance, so I might know a little bit here. It's all chaos. Okay, there isn't some cabal of people that secretly meet and then decide how they're going to run the world. I mean, it's just not really like that. It's a bunch of self-interested people making decisions based on what they think is best. Much of those decisions are self-interested, but then some of those could be interested for what they believe is a greater good or whatever it is. It depends on the person, depends on the individual. And these people come into power. And then, of course, just like people are designed to do, they network socially, they talk amongst each other, they influence each other, and they make decisions. Okay. So that's how it goes. It's not an organized cabal. I'm sure there's people who've tried to organize it, but it doesn't exactly work that way. All right. So you have these people, a smaller percentage of people within this system that are directing, creating, and leading the system. And many of these people, in order for them to be in that position, they need to be supported. Okay. They need to get supported by everybody else in the system. Okay. Now, then you have this other subset of people. All right. A bigger circle, slightly bigger circle. All right. Of people who benefit from the system. Okay, so now you have take my mic out here. Hold on. All right. If I lose sound, tell me. Okay. So you have the system that everybody's in. Okay. You have the people who run it, the controllers, and then you have the beneficiaries who benefit. Okay. And then there's in the middle, some of the people who are beneficiaries control the system, and some of the people who are beneficiaries do not control the system. Okay. So you got everybody else, the people that control, the beneficiaries, and sometimes the controllers and beneficiary are one and the same. Everybody's in the system. Okay. But it's a question of, are you a slave to it, which most people are? Are you subservient to it? Are you in economic servitude to a system? Or are you benefiting from the system? And benefiting from the system isn't a dollar amount. Like, you could be a small business owner who lives life on your own terms, and you're not a billionaire, but you make decent enough money to where you can live below your resources. So you have more resources than what you need to live comfortably and protect yourself, and you can live your life that way and not be socially conditioned by the system. So you can be free from the system in that way. There's not necessarily a dollar amount on being free and benefiting from the system. Okay. So I recommend that people find the way to benefit, because you can't get out of the system. You're just in it. If you live on the planet Earth, that's the way it is. So how can you benefit from the systems, which are very chaotic and they're not there to serve you. They're there to serve others, and they're there to serve a bigger picture. And sometimes that works against you. Sometimes that works for you. Usually it's both. Okay. You need to figure out how to be the person to benefit from the system, to take what's going on and use it to your advantage. If you want to be in charge of it or in control of it, like get into politics or be highly influential, if you can be that person, then do so. Okay, that gives you another set of headaches and problems, but that's okay if that's what you want. But what you don't want to be is, you don't want to be in the bigger circle, the person who's a slave to the system. Okay, which most people are. And you become a slave to the system due to your thoughts and due to your economic servitude. Okay, where you don't have the freedom of choice because of your economic situation, which you can get out of. It's up to you to fight to get out of that. Okay. Nobody's going to get you out of that necessarily for you. All right. I mean, some people are born into benefits and, have higher benefits than others and can become a beneficiary of the system easier than others, but it doesn't matter. All right. It's going to be up to you to stay out of servitude and to be in a place of being a beneficiary at the very least. All right. But you got to understand that there's people controlling it and people who benefit, and they have to present a narrative that gains compliance, not agreement, but compliance from everybody else who's in the system. So all the other people who are serving the system, left, right, liberal, conservative, feminist, I don't know, men's rights guys, whatever. Okay. Most of these people are slaves to the system, fighting each other, and that keeps them occupied so they can continue to be slaves. All right. So I'm going to go through the history of it and you'll see it. But that is basically the model I want you to think of. All right. You're either in charge, okay, you're benefiting, or you're a slave. All right. Those are your options. There's different degrees of slavery, different degrees of servitude, just different degrees of beneficiary too. There's different degrees of being in charge of things, right? But if you're in servitude, and where that starts and usually ends is right up here, it's mentally. All right. If you see things differently, you can take actions to get out of economic and ideological servitude. When you can't see it because you're either too stupid or too egotistical, right? Then you're a fucking slave. Congratulations. That's how it works. Okay. And keeping you, the way that compliance is gained from the slaves is to keep them fighting each other through ideology and to market different ideas. Right. And you got to understand, it's not like all your ideas. A lot of these things are total chaos. So ideas will happen because people might be well-meaning, or they have a certain agenda, and maybe that agenda is even good. But then the people who are smart enough and chosen enough to be in charge of the system, they look at that and go, how can we use this to our benefit? That's what they do. So something like feminism crops up. Maybe there's good reasons it cropped up, but then there's going to be certain elements of people in charge and people benefiting who are going to go, how can I use this to my advantage? Now, it's okay to use things to your advantage if you're in charge, as long as you're serving others who are in charge. The only check and balance to that is us. And people in charge know that. They know that, well, I would say I'm a beneficiary of the system, but the beneficiaries who aren't in control, as well as those who are slaves to the system, we only let the people in charge and in control be in charge. They're only in that position because we let them be there. Right. And that's what it boils down to. And to a degree, although there's some degree of force and stuff, but when and we can get down, I don't want to get down the rabbit hole with that, but to degrees, they know that they're only there because we let them, we being anyone who's a slave, as well as anyone who's a beneficiary who's not in charge. I'm not in charge of the system. I would say I'm a beneficiary. Okay. But people who make decisions and policy decisions and who are actually in charge, they know that they need to get our compliance. And it's a higher ROI in the short term to get compliance by by not serving you. All right. So just to get your compliance, use a marketing campaign to basically scam you into compliance is easier than actually serving you in some ways. And it's more of a benefit short-term resource wise. Now, from a perspective of having higher values, of doing the right thing, right? Of maybe even longevity. Okay. Like the longevity of your place as a controller or as somebody in charge, that might be compromised by scamming people. All right. But in the short term, it serves them better to sell you on ideas that don't necessarily serve you and get your compliance, and then continue to give less or offer less of a return on your labor into the system. All right. It's a higher ROI to do that for them, for most people. And it's natural. So unless there's somebody who's in charge that has these morals and these values, and like they're really paying attention to them and like not compromising them and all this, they're all going to fall into basically trying to get more out of you for less, even if you're a beneficiary. Okay. They're going to try to get as much out of you as they can while giving as little as possible. That's the nature of transactional relationships, by the way, which is, as somebody who coaches people on relationships, that's why I say that's a bad thing. Okay. And so that is what you have. This is the system we're in. When we look at any ideology like feminism, it gets used to propagate this system, to keep people in servitude and economic servitude, rather than keep people as being necessarily beneficiaries. Because see, beneficiaries who may not be in charge have more influence on the people in charge within that system. So the people in charge of less power, the more beneficiaries there are. You know what I mean? Because the more people who are benefiting from the system and thinking that way and figuring that out, the more people who will push back against the system instead of just pushing back on their peers. Most of the time, it's people pushing back. Let's think racism. You got racist whites and racist blacks. There's not as many in 2025 as there were in the past, but like it's there. Okay. And what are they doing? They're fighting each other while they're still in economic servitude. That's most of what it is. That's most of the people on this ideology. Most of the people who consume YouTube and political content are slaves to the system. And they're just jumping on an ideology, some of which may be good, some of which may be bad, but that ideology is being used to keep them fighting other people who are also slaves. As long as the slaves keep fighting, you'll get compliance. They can't fight you if you're in charge. That's just the way it goes, right? And so it's up to us to unplug and not be, at least at the very least, not be in a psychological servitude to the system. So we unplug, and then by not being in psychological servitude, you can figure out how to benefit. And how can I take what's going on and all the shit I can't change, and how do I figure out how to benefit from it so that I can have a positive life, get what I want in life, influence others in my life, have good relationships and good communities, and do that sorts of things so other people are benefiting too. How can I do that? Right? When you unplug mentally, then you can start to unplug economically. You see what I mean? Which means being successful to some degree. All right. So I know that's like a really philosophical approach to a way to start this, but that's going to cloud, hopefully, the rest of this conversation. I think that this is going to be a higher order of thinking kind of a conversation. So like people who are TikTok brained, who have no attention span and who just need to be mindlessly entertained. Okay. So they don't have a psychological breakdown. Okay. This isn't going to be the video for you guys. If that's you. All right. If you're dumb or willingly stupid based on your social media addiction or whatever your problem is, right? This isn't going to be for you. It's just not, you know what I mean? This is going to be a higher level conversation. I don't expect this to do well algorithmically, but I'm going to put it out anyways for those who really are interested in understanding this stuff. Maybe if it does well, again, I'll do a more cleaned up version. Now let's get into the first wave. Okay. First wave of feminism, back to that 1800s to 1940s, around thereabouts. Okay. So it began with the abolitionist movement. So basically the abolitionist movement was motivated against fighting slavery and unequal human rights. Now, why was that? This is why I'm going to try to do this in about an hour or so. But the reality is these topics could take up entire semesters at a university. So I'm going to have to give a lot of summaries. If some of those summaries are incomplete, bear with me on that because it's a time issue. But slavery and the abolishment of slavery, I mean, although there were always abolitionists around, for a long time. I mean, there always were, probably arguably, but slavery never changed because it didn't fit the economic model. The economic model was based in agriculture, based in an elite class that needed or required slave labor in a way to run itself and run the economy. That was what the system was, not just in the United States, but all over the world for a very long time, arguably a couple thousand years, thousands of years, really. When we move from hunter-gatherer or tribes into more of city-states and an agricultural revolution, right? And to agriculture, we shifted into slave labor. All right. That's just how it went. Okay. And slave labor was the thing for a long time. The pyramids built on slave labor, right? So that's just what it was. Now, what happened was, okay, the economic climate shifted with the Industrial Revolution and with the need for more laborers. Okay. And the need to have more laborers that are motivated to produce meant that, and this started in the North in the manufacturing, that you had to get rid of slavery because it wasn't fitting the economic model. Okay. And I'm not saying there weren't ideological reasons to get rid of it. Certainly there are, but those ideological reasons for not having slaves, and that's been around for a long time since slavery's been around. It never happened because it didn't fit the economics. But once things changed with the from agricultural based economy to a labor based economy, then we needed more labor and we needed to be able to have motivated labor, and that changed things. And that's when you ended up with more of a push. I mean, you had an intact nuclear family in the agricultural structure, right? In different ways. And usually you had extended family and everybody else living on a farm. That moved into the American dream with the agricultural revolution. And that was what ultimately became the push, get rid of slavery, and to start seeing individuals as individuals who need human rights. So the idea that people have human rights, okay, that's been around for a while, but that we start offering that to everybody in the same way. So we offer women human rights, okay, the way that we would offer men human rights, and blacks and Chinese and Native American Indians, whatever. You know what I mean? That regardless of your race and regardless of your gender, that you should be offered and you should have rights as a human being. That became more of a conversation around the abolition of slavery, which laid the grounds for feminism and that feminist movement to start, because the structure before was the women were at home supporting a man who was laboring in an agricultural economy usually. And that changed and converted more into now, okay, we want to give more rights to women. And the reason, and it started with property rights and the rights to vote, because people should have autonomy and that sort of thing, right? And that allowed for more compliance of the masses to supply more laborers. But eventually, what ended up happening is that you we had a war, World War II. Okay. And so World War II happens. Now we have a gap in the labor market. Now the men are going to war and there's less people laboring in manufacturing. And we needed those laborers in manufacturing in order to sustain our war effort. World War II is a big deal. Okay. Bigger deal. I mean, I've been to a number of wars, okay, myself, like in my military service, and they were small potatoes compared to World War II. Okay. That was a lot of people. A lot of people died there, right? And a lot of people got enacted into service during that time. And it was a long time, okay, that there was a lot of war happening. And so it was a push. And so what you ended up with was the government ran a propaganda campaign to get women into the workplace. And the idea was that women needed to support the war effort and support men. So far in first wave, the family was still intact and women were considered a part of a team with the male in the relationship and in the family. All right. They just needed to be and needed to be given more individual rights. All right. For fairness. And it's so they could thrive, because if you were a single woman or a widow, you know what I mean? Or somebody, whatever, you were kind of screwed prior to, um, the introduction of feminism. Prior, you couldn't vote, couldn't own property in the same way. It was very difficult. And so some of those things changed. And I would say those changes were good and necessary. But then we got into a propaganda campaign in order to put women into the workplace. That was necessary too for the war effort. But here's the thing, that part of that propaganda campaign was the sales pitch was that you can have a better life working rather than staying at home. By going to a job while the men are at war, you not only support the man, support the war effort, support your country, but you also are offered a better life, because now you can have economic freedom and autonomy. And so women were told that the reason why you're unhappy is because you're not free. You don't have freedom because you are subservient and subject to the success or failure of a man. And so your happiness and your well-being, you're going to suffer less. What will alleviate your suffering is entering the workforce and having economic freedom. So that was what was sold during the first wave. There's a problem. And the problem with that is working doesn't by itself offer you economic freedom. Working in a dead-end job in a factory maybe, and getting laid off during the Great Depression, and then trying to find other work and finding low-paying jobs, for example, and you can barely put food on the table. That is not economic freedom. Okay. So, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't have to work or something to have economic freedom. That's not what I'm saying. But by itself, just showing up to a job somewhere isn't going to make you economically free. You have to be successful and figure out how to work the system you're in order to accumulate wealth so you make more money than what it is required to sustain a comfortable living. That's economic freedom. That's was left out of the story in the propaganda. So women in mass were told and believed and thought, well, gosh, men don't suffer. They have it easy because they have economic freedom because they slave in a coal mine for 12 hours a day. No, that's not. Obviously, that guy isn't free either, and he suffers just as much. He suffers in a different way. So women and every human being on earth has to handle suffering. And the big lie is to say, hey, this other person who's also a slave to the system that like you, they're not suffering as much as you are. You suffer more than they do. So the key to alleviating your suffering is to create equality by taking whatever they have and keeping some of that for yourself. And now, you getting what they have, that's going to alleviate your suffering. And it's not true because they're suffering too. They're just suffering differently. And everybody's still a damn slave to the system. You see what I mean? So women were sold on an idea that their suffering would be alleviated by entering the workforce. And so that's what happened. They entered the workforce. And again, it was good they did, especially around the time, but that sales pitch, that propaganda campaign created a domino effect of problems that we're going to see later on. Now, some other key milestones is because of the ideology of having economic autonomy as a woman. And again, it's not that you didn't have freedom as a woman married and supporting a household. The difference was you were on a team. If your husband was a good husband and you landed a good guy who was smart and successful and benevolent and cared about you as a wife or whatever, that was what happened. You were winning. The stay-at-home mom won, all of the prizes when she got a good man. The problem was not every guy's a good man, right? And so a lot of women were suffering because their husbands are suffering and they didn't have the psychological. There's so many things that they lacked back then compared to what we have access to now. They didn't have psychological development to the degree we have. They didn't have personal development to the degree we have. They didn't have the communication skills even half the time, to the level we have. So you had a lot of suffering. You know what I mean? And the lie was that, well, the men are suffering less. They're just suffering differently. You know what I mean? It wasn't an equality problem. It was a suffering problem because of people not being aware of how to be a beneficiary of the system versus being in servitude or being a slave to the system. That was the real problem. But people in charge and people running the propaganda campaign, they're not interested in giving you that message. They want to give you the message that's going to benefit them in the short term at the time. So, hey, there's a war effort. Here's the message to benefit us for the war effort. And so here's the story we're going to tell. That's how it works. It's not a nefarious plan. It's just self-interest being executed with short-term goals over and over and over again. And so now we get into, if economic autonomy from a man is going to give me the financial freedom I want, and that's going to alleviate my suffering, then I need to have rights, and I need to have the same rights. There needs to be more equality, and I need to have my reproductive rights as well. I need to be able to decide whether I want to have a baby or not just be subject to my sexual desires and whatever ends up happening with a guy, right? That leads to the first birth control clinic being opened up in 1916 by Margaret Sanger. Okay. She opens up the first birth control clinic. Now, the public narrative for this birth control clinic fit in with the women's movement and women's suffrage. And that public narrative involved women's empowerment, family planning, and health. Okay. But the documented reality was that Sanger was promoting a eugenics program. And she wanted to reduce a reduction of growth and an elimination in some ways of groups that she considered undesirables. Undesirables would include Black Americans and the poor. Okay. So she had an agenda, and a lot of political supporters had that same agenda, to use birth control and birth control clinics to suppress the growth of the Black family and to suppress the growth of the poor, the poor and people who are undesirable, who rely on the system and don't contribute to the system, basically, right? As much as it may be others. And so it was a eugenics program sold as empowerment. And that's feminism so far, right? So just keep that in mind, okay? So feminism in the first wave was a eugenics program after a point, okay? And in 1920, women gained the right to vote, which, some people might not, some guys might not like that. I'm okay with that. I'm not as extreme as like some red pill content guy or whatever. It's not me. Okay. The women got the right to vote. I'm not going to go down that road with the argument, because there's argument of maybe the only people who should have the right to vote should be taxpayers. There's all that stuff, right? And some of the whatever. That's a whole nother thing. Then we got the war effort. All right. Okay. That's 1939 to 1945. The male labor shortage, government campaigns. All right. Now I'm just running through my notes here. And so during this time, women in the workforce became normalized. All right. So that's what happened. It was normalization of women in the workforce. Now, this created a negative problem, because then once men came back from war, then women were pushed out of the workforce. Basically, it no longer fit the agenda of the system to have women getting more rights and benefits. I mean, they even got childcare benefits and some of those things so that they could show up to the factory or wherever they were working. Well, the childcare benefits, the incentives, the pay, and the positions all got removed at a larger scale. And women who were a higher percentage working in the workforce dropped down to like 30%. You know what I mean? In the workforce. So women were still working, but there was a significant drop, significant layoffs, in order to hire the men who just got back from war back into these labor positions. Basically going back to the old structure where men and women were part of a team and living in the home. But the problem is the realization that men and women were part of a team working where the woman is working in the home as a stay-at-home wife and mom or whatever she may be, and then the guy's working, like that concept was not propagandized, was not presented. What was propagandized was your suffering can be alleviated by showing up to work and having economic autonomy. And the problem is that promise can never be realized by feminism and by just showing up to a factory. That can never happen. All right. But people, when women were pushed out of the workforce or had their benefits reduced, then many women were just upset naturally, because they felt that they were pushed out of their opportunity, that they didn't get to be in the workforce long enough to receive the promises that they were made by the propaganda campaign. And so that became the struggle and the fight. Now, and that led us into the second wave of feminism. All right. And so the grounds of unsatisfied women, unsatisfied families being sold on an idea that was false and fake in order to benefit the system, that groundwork was laid into the second wave, to create the second wave of feminism. All right. And so there were some good things, obviously, that were achieved during that period, for sure, but it was all based in a lie, based in eugenics for some of it, for controlling. Not that controlling your reproduction is necessarily, you know what I mean, not by itself a bad thing, but it was promoted as a eugenics program. You know what I mean? And again, women were lied to, basically told that their suffering would be alleviated by being a man or more like a man. And nobody told them that men suffer too. Nobody told them that, you suffer more when you're a slave to the system. The only people that suffered less are those in charge and those who learn to benefit from it, right? That the real story was never told. Okay. And so that laid the groundwork for things to sort of continue into the second wave. And the second wave started around 1950s, moved to the 1980s. Okay. So that first wave narrative was work would equal empowerment and freedom. That was a lie. All right. World War II normalized women working, propagandized it, framed it as patriotic, liberating. After the war, mass layoffs of women to prioritize veterans, which led to resentment. And they wanted to chase those unfulfilled promises. And this frustration laid the emotional foundation for the second wave. Now, and again, to kind of review this too, most women found that workplace entry, and today it's the same, entering into the workplace and having to work does not bring you autonomy. It just brings you a new form of struggles. Okay. You have to be successful, and you have to just showing up to work somewhere and surviving is not autonomy. Okay. Dual income households is not autonomy, because now you just created more competition in the workplace, which means companies and people who hire can offer less benefits for more labor. And all that extra money you have has to get outsourced to take care of the things that the woman could not take care of, can't take care of because she's at work. And then any extra money left over usually gets spent in the economy, which is good on the short term, but then in the long term causes prices to increase and a lot of other things. Now you have a situation, decades and decades later, where two income households can't even afford rent, can't even afford, or they can barely afford rent. Try buying a house today and being an average income earner. Go ahead, go look at the housing prices as an average income earner in the United States and tell me that we're better off right now. All right. All of this inflating of prices, that was accelerated by having more dollars into the marketplace based on this labor. So these were not solving problems necessarily. All right. Short-term income boost from two working parents did not lead us to long-term success. Who benefited from the short-term income boost? The boomers. And now they took their bag and ran. And now you younger people are stuck trying to figure shit out. Isn't that fun? All right. So the hard truth is women entering the workplace did not remove hardship. And in fact, it created additional hardship, and it changed the type of hardship. So now we have women fighting and, wanting to be at work, wanting more autonomy, wanting the promises that they were made and that were not delivered. We entered into the 1950s. Well, governments realized during this time of women in labor, not, it sounds like they're pregnant, women in the workforce, governments realized during this time that more workers meant a bigger tax base, right? Dual incomes meant higher consumptions. Corporations realized that. All right. And so what happened? Well, let's just change the narrative, because if we have more people, two parents are working, that's more taxes. That's a little bit more money, and that's more money to buy frivolous things, right? That company owners can market to people as things that they need when they really don't need it. Okay, so now we get larger consumption. So, all right, so that's what we end up with. Okay, corporations realized that larger hiring pools meant they could offer lower wages, fewer benefits. Now we've seen that today, haven't we? You don't have people working and getting a pension anymore, for example. Okay, so there's a lot of changes now that are not in favor of the people who are being subservient economically to the system. So there's a narrative shift from patriotism to patriarchy. Okay. The old sales pitch was you must work for your country and for the men who are at war to support the war effort and do your duty. And this is going to make you happier, alleviate your suffering, and give you economic autonomy. Only some of those things were true, and some major things in that statement I just made were false, were lies. Okay. Now the new sales pitch became, well, men are the source of your suffering because they have the rights that you should have. So you have to work to escape men, to have your autonomy, and to realize the benefits that they realize. You need to have your suffering alleviated as you were promised. And then you had that ripped away from you from men, because all the men came back from war and took your jobs. Okay. They ripped away your opportunity to be happy and less of a slave, right? Men ripped away your opportunity to not suffer. And now you're stuck either unemployed or having to be subservient to a man you don't like, because most relationships are not happy back then, same as today. I would argue more relationships were happy back then than are today, but we'll get to those reasons. But there's still a fair amount that we're not, because people don't have relationship skills. Okay. That's something I teach, something I train you guys on how to have those skills so you can have good relationships. But was there a coaching program back then to do that? No. Okay. You had to rely on churches, and even today that can be hit or miss. Okay. Morality doesn't give you skill. That's the thing on that. Going to church and having morality is good. Okay. If that's what you believe in and it leads to you to having higher levels of morality, I totally support it. But it doesn't give you the skills you need in order to navigate a relationship. Okay. Think of it like being, I don't know, being a better boxer or jiu-jitsu player. You're not going to learn jiu-jitsu by going to church unless you're rolling on the mats with a jiu-jitsu instructor in church. You know what I mean? You can't, morality is not going to make you a better grappler, right? You have to you have to learn how to grapple. Well, same with relationships. Morality and ideology is not going to give you skills with women, seduction, communication, all those things you need to keep a relationship happy. Most people didn't have those skills. Women aren't happy in the relationships. They felt like they were in a prison. And the way out, the new sales pitch was to fight the patriarchy. So second wave patriarchy became a word between the 1950s, 60s into the 70s. All right. And into 1980. From 1950 to 1980, the word patriarchy became a thing. That was the villain now. So you understand, when you have controllers, people that control the system, they need to create a villain that's imaginary, so you can fight that imaginary villain so that you can comply to the system. Instead of fighting to make a better system, to improve the system, to get more beneficiaries, take some power away from the controllers, maybe, instead of influencing people in charge or being in charge or being a beneficiary, if you're fighting an imaginary enemy, then you just get to be compliant to the system while you fight an imaginary enemy, and nothing changes for you. And that's exactly what the patriarchy is. The patriarchy is an imaginary villain. All right. Men are not the villain. Okay. You could argue that men are in charge and therefore they're in charge of the system. That's the argument. But who are you actually fighting against, though, when you make it about men? You're fighting against other men who are slaves, just like, women are fighting against other men who are slaves just like they are. They're not fighting against men in charge. You know what I mean? So take gender out of it and just make it be about, not even make it about fighting anybody. Just make it about benefiting and succeeding, and thinking about fairness and what we need to do to allow a fair way for people to succeed with their work and their efforts. That would be more of a push if you wanted to fight something through politics or something like that. But that's not the pitch. All right. So the pitch is that you got to escape men, become more autonomous, fight men and male leadership in a system in order to have this economic autonomy that's going to make you not suffer and be happy, which of course is not a promise that can be kept from that. Again, women being economically autonomous, but still being a slave to a system, working for a wage and then having to subsidize their income by having a sugar daddy or being an OnlyFans creator. That's not exactly, maybe they're in their own way, they're getting out of a system or trying to, but that's not exactly economic freedom, is it? You have to be successful in order to have that. Okay. Just showing up to a job isn't being successful. The stay-at-home mom that supports the guy who makes 4 times the amount of money of the average guy so that that family can live with more resources than what they need. That woman is more successful than some single mom who shows up to a job, hands down, because she's working at home to support the structure and the team that creates the higher income. But that narrative is not sold, not even today, right? So they were sold that the patriarchy is the villain and dependence on men was the oppression. Even though being a part of a team would be with a man, and yeah, the man's in charge, sure, okay, but you're still working as part of this team, right? That's not how it's framed. It's that you're being oppressed by a man by being by having a guy work hard to take care of you. You're somehow oppressed. That's what the narrative became during the second wave. And workforce participation was reframed as liberation. So now it was no longer a necessity and duty and something women needed to do to support, the war effort. It was something that women should do to liberate themselves. So if you didn't liberate yourself, if you were a stay-at-home mom, you were less of a woman than a woman who's going to be strong and independent and show up in the workforce. So you had something called feminine mystique in the problem with no name, they called it. This is Betty Friedman, 1963, wrote and branded domestic life as captivity. So that was the ideology. This feminist thinker presented domestic life as being captivity, in that you're less of a woman if you stay at home and support a man. If you have a family, if you're a mother, okay, you have to be autonomous from a man in order to be a better person, right? And that was what got pushed. And that, and they just kind of continued ideologically with propaganda and government and corporate support. Because remember, what's benefiting the economy in a labor-based economy is more laborers, right? And it may not benefit those who are a slave to the system as much as they have to put more labor in order to get less in return. But those who are in control of the system benefit exponentially. Those who figure out how to benefit may not be in control, but those who figure out how to win in that system, which is again what I recommend you do, okay, but they do benefit exponentially. But that the average person, the majority of people, man or woman, they got less and less and more, upset about it, you could say, more and more dissatisfied. Okay. Reproductive autonomy was leveraged also at this time. Birth control was previously framed as of empowerment, but now that extended into abortions being federally legalized in 1973 with Roe versus Wade. Was it 73? I don't know. I might have wrote that down wrong. You guys can correct me in the chat. But yeah, women gain autonomous reproductive control without male input now. So now it wasn't just birth control, but they can control themselves after the pregnancy. They can choose to kill the baby at any point before the kid's birth. So without the input from a male. So now it's complete autonomy now from male, reproductively as well as economically. At least that's what was shown. Now, never mind though that the system is being driven by men. Okay, the top laborers, the people in charge, the top performers, all those things are the men. The people doing the hard jobs, okay, once things progressed into more of a communication-based economy, which I'll get into that part next. Men were doing all the hard jobs, and men statistically do the hard jobs today, the physically hard jobs, right? And some of the other ones, and men still drive the economy, but you know what I mean? They were still had this narrative, right? And so anyways, we get into, again, corporate ROI. Let's see here. So now you got women who now we've shifted from a relationship that was not really adversarial. And if you went to church, which most people did, it promoted an intact family, husband, wife, having a team structure where our different roles based on gender, but those roles created a team and you were supporting and each other in a structure where that's not adversarial. Women being promoted to go into the workforce and then see men as the enemy and see men as someone they have to compete against. And during the second wave, we've now created an adversarial structure between men and women. So between the 1950s, 60s with the sexual revolution, 70s to about 1980, we created a thing where men and women were now in an adversarial relationship socially, competing with each other for resources versus being on a team together to accumulate resources within the system. So that was the shift. And that shift benefited who? Governments, large corporations, business, and any of the people who figure out how to benefit from that system. So that was the shift. Okay. So, but at the end of the day, second wave, still unrealized promises. Workplace reality was that the workplace did not equal liberation for women and just created usually more problems. Women are still women, meaning they have a biological desire to have families, to have children. So now women had to pull double duty of trying to be a mom and trying to be a parent, trying to be a housewife, and trying to also be a worker and to compete with men in the workplace. So women tended to compete with men in the workplace. They'd come home and compete with men at home, right? So now you have women competing with men instead of working in a team structure where a man's in charge, right? Men being in charge was considered a problem, a bad thing, because, that led to oppression according to this model, even though it didn't. It only led to oppression if the guy in charge was a dickhead or a douchebag. If you married a good guy, you weren't being oppressed. You know what I mean? But it was a lack of trust of men in general and this need to have full autonomy, which is really a lie again, because you're not autonomous unless you're successful. And it's only a smaller percentage of people who are successful. Just going to work isn't going to give you autonomy, but that's it. And so economic struggle continued and the problems went up rather than down with second wave feminism. And the ideology further enslaved women. This time, though, it was in the workplace rather than in the home. Men were already enslaved to a system, right? It was just a matter of could they be successful enough to get out of that enslavement or not? That was the only question for men, right? But now they had to deal with adversarial relationships with their wives and with women. So now they're not just slaves to a system, the average guy, but they're also a slave to their marriage, right? Because they're in an adversarial relationship that they don't know how to navigate or get out of. Demands escalated for like equal pay, hiring advantages. You had competition in the workplace among men and women, and women were using oppression in order to try to gain these equal benefits. And in some ways that was, if women are working, they should get the same benefits offered as anybody else. I mean, it's not like equal pay for the same work. Pay based on merit is really where it should be, right? And so fighting against some of these things isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it created again this adversarial dynamic. Okay. So as the suffering continued, because getting into the workplace and between 1950 and 1980s, women gained, better pay, better opportunities, all kinds of things, right? It's like women could compete in the workplace. I'm not saying it was perfect, and equality is really a myth. Equality is not a real thing. There's fairness, but you'll never have everything completely equal. And even if you did, it would be unfair because someone's working harder and more skilled than another. and it's the harder worker, more skilled person should get better benefits or higher pay, right? So like having equality across the board is not a fair structure, but you do want a fair structure. Things became, we could say, more fair up until the 1980s. Women could compete. Now the lie is that, oh, women were being oppressed still, because that's where the narrative went. Because women's suffering were not alleviated from the structure yet, then it was, well, we need to double down. The patriarchy is even more to blame now, even though now women are pulling double duty, right? And there's no work-life balance and all this stuff. And this is the problem with the patriarchy. So again, the imaginary enemy of the patriarchy, still to blame. Okay. And that leads us into the third wave. All right. The second wave didn't deliver freedom. It just delivered a repackaged form of servitude. The family unit weakened. Economic pressure increased. Gender resentment rose. Men and women were no longer working together in an adversarial relationship. And when the promises failed again, blame was placed on who? Men, not the system, not the controllers, not the people in charge, men. Because again, if you can keep people fighting against an imaginary enemy and fighting against each other, then they can't systematically change anything, influence people in charge, learn how to benefit from the system, right? Higher ROI in keeping people compliant. Okay. Second wave feminism didn't solve suffering, it reframed it. Women didn't escape a system, they were recruited deeper into it. And when that didn't work, they were told the problem was men and not the people in charge of a system that is just exploiting everybody. Okay. So those misunderstandings set this wave, and third wave feminism began right around the early 1990s and continued till about close to about 2010. The theme of this third wave was sex. So now we get into sex. So sex as power and victimhood as power, and something that I call selective empowerment. The selective, yeah. So more legal rights have been secured. By 1990s, legal rights were secured for women. Women had opportunity, and arguably as much opportunity in the workplace as men, even though the lie says that they didn't. The lie says that women are oppressed, but they were not in the 90s. Okay. Oppression exists on micro levels, but that was not where it was at, because it benefited. It didn't exist at a macro level. All right. And you can throw numbers at me about women not, well, there are less women engineers. There's less women that want to be engineers. Well, there's a pay gap. Well, more women are on a mass scale of statistics, more women are, taking off for pregnancy and stuff like that and checking out of the workplace. So like there's all of this this lack of equality in the workplace stuff, and these stats that get promoted, they're all part of the propaganda. All right. And we had legal rights secured. Birth control and abortions were, prevalent, gave women full reproductive autonomy. Workforce was gained access. Women had access to the workforce. All right. Again, not saying that there wouldn't be discrimination in some places, but those would be in certain places. That would be anecdotal situations versus systemic, because there's other areas too where women would be given more benefits for being women. So, I mean, it kind of equals out in that sense. I won't say equal out, but it's just sort of all chaos. But again, the struggle, the dissatisfaction, the suffering remained. And so patriarchy, the imaginary enemies to blame. All right. So with no legal battles left, what was next? What in the 1990s, there wasn't much in terms of legal battles we could continue to fight when it came to individual rights like property rights, taxation, or what are we going to do next? Where are we going to go? Okay, so the movement moved to sexual power and identity politics and cultural dominance. It had to move to social power because economic power and some of these other things. Yeah, on a whole scale, women were less economically successful than men, but it has more to do with merit, has more to do with, just success rather than opportunity. All right. Um, so we have this adversarial gender dynamic that intensifies in the 90s. During the second wave, men and women were competitors instead of part of the same team. The third wave escalated this into a sexual battleground. All right. So the workplace dynamic now becomes sexual, sex as currency, sex as a weapon, and using victimhood as leverage. Sex and power became the new battlefield for equality during the third wave. So the sexual power play runs like this. Women's empowerment took a new form. They used sexuality to gain power over men, and then they would police men's sexuality, accusing them of exploitation where useful. So now you can see sexual liberation and being more sexually liberated and using sex for power. And then on the other hand, policing the sexuality of men with accusation and accusing anything outside of what the social narrative would consider their boundaries, accusing them of exploitation. And so two realities would exist simultaneously here. All right. Those two realities were women were using sexuality to compete, to gain favor, all right, to get promotions, all right, being pretty, being feminine, looking nice, smelling nice, got women more clients, got women more promotions, got women moved in different positions. There were some places of the economy that were considered, a woman's type of a job, and a man would not excel there. Someplace like nursing, for example, back in the early days, not anymore, but back then, teaching, right? Whatever. And then on top of using sexuality to compete, women were punishing men for responding to that sexuality. Okay. So that was a way to use sex for power. For every woman who felt harassed, and there was legitimate harassment that happened too. So I'm not saying men didn't harass women. There were men who harass women now. You know what I mean? There was legitimate harassment. But for every woman who felt harassed by an employer, by the system she was in, there stood 2 to 10 more women ready to leverage their own sexuality for advancement. Okay, so one woman feels passed over and she's being sexually harassed. Handful of women are like, "Oh, this guy is open to promoting us if I use my sexuality." And so they use their sexuality to get ahead. So women became their own worst enemy in this sense. All right. But then once they would do that, they would weaponize that and be the victims. If they benefited, they slept with a guy for a job, for example, to use the most extreme example. She sleeps with a guy, gets a promotion, and then she claims that she's the victim because this guy took advantage of her, in the imbalance of power. That's what gets promoted. All right. Now, those who don't like to hold women accountable for anything, because that's also part of the lie, who, women are smart and strong and smarter than men, but at the same time can't be held accountable for anything because they're like children somehow and whatever, you know what I mean? That's that dichotomy, right? Which is not true, none of it, but you know what I mean? That's those of you who have been brainwashed. This is not going to sit well, but you have to understand there's accountability on both sides here, and using sexuality to get ahead is commonplace in the world of women, and men exploiting that is commonplace, and neither are good, but we have to consider both things, right? And this is the paradox of selective empowerment is what it's called. Okay. This is what I call it. This is me. Paradox of selective empowerment. That can be summed up like this. Here's the paradox of selective empowerment. Stop sexualize me. Now look at my tits. All right. We can sum it up in that. Okay. So like examples we see today of this paradox, women filming themselves half naked at the gym and then shaming men who are at the gym who notice her or look at her. For example, she's filming herself to put herself on Instagram for thousands of people to look at and men to look at and simp for. But then when a guy notices that she's filming herself and scantily clad clothing and showing her ass everywhere. And then she's offended and acts like she's being harassed. You see that all over the place. And then she'll do a TikTok on it for more attention, right? That's that paradox. That's the paradox of selective empowerment. Okay. It's this inconsistent double standard. How about women can do everything a man can, but then they demand lower standards for physical standards and for military, police, and that sort of thing. I mean, that example, okay? The same people who support that women are powerful and can do everything a man can will also support different standards and physical standards for those types of jobs. That's the paradox, all right? How about I'm strong and independent, but then she's being subsidized by men, expects the man to pay for everything on dates, being subsidized by the state in the case of single motherhood. It's a paradox, right? Men are incompetent, but also men run the world and oppress us, right? If men are so incompetent and stupid, how come they're running the world and you can't seem to fucking get out of it? You know what I mean? Those two things don't exist really, but that's the selective empowerment paradox. All right. Sleeping with a boss for access and then claiming harassment later. There are just as many cases of that sort of thing happening as there are guys who harassed women and passed them over because they wouldn't sexually, use their sexuality. Both are wrong. You know what I mean? The Weinstein type scenarios, it's a terrible scenario. But how many women slept with that guy to get ahead and were glad to do it? Right? How many slept with Weinstein to get a part and were glad to do it because they could not compete otherwise? That we don't talk about that. Right? How many women slept with him and then cried about it later after they made millions of dollars or whatever they made for the movies that they've done? We don't talk about that much, do we? I'm not saying he was a good guy, and I'm not saying he wasn't exploitive, and I'm not saying he shouldn't be in jail, right? But we don't talk about the other side of it, do we? And that's the thing, and that's the lie. All right, that's a propaganda machine. That's the lie of feminism. It's this double standard, and this happened during the third wave. Maybe it happened earlier, but it really accelerated during the third wave. This paradox of selective empowerment. How about believe women, which turned into believe all women? Remember that? But then you look at false allegations from women, right? And the rise in that. Clearly, you can't believe all women. You have to look at the evidence, but that's that paradox at play. And if you don't agree with the paradox, if you don't say believe all women, you're going to be shamed, ostracized. If you have a YouTube channel, you'll be algorithmically suppressed, perhaps. Okay. You're going to be canceled. You're going to be prevented from making a living. You're going to be prevented from having things in society because you didn't agree with a false statement, with a paradox that can't be true. Like believe all women when there are women all over the place making false allegations. And there are women who aren't making false allegations and who genuinely are victims. But two things can be true at once, right? But the feminist in the power struggle is to give you a penalty if you don't toe the line, follow the narrative. And understand this benefits people in charge. That's why it's there. It's being used for those in charge and for many people who learn how to benefit from the system. You know what I mean? To keep it the way it is. That's selective empowerment. Women claim agency when it benefits them and victimhood when it protects them or gives them leverage. That's the paradox of the third wave. That selective empowerment paradox is the logical flaw of the third wave. Okay. And that, again, 90s to about 2010, the cultural manifestations of this, you had sex and empowerment messages dominated by pop culture, right? So you had the Anita Hill thing, Clarence Thomas, 1991, sexual harassment in the workplace, highlighted that in 1991. That's what kicked off the third wave, arguably. Okay, and that launched the Believe Women campaign. All the way back in 1991, there's a Believe Women campaign. You see how that was recycled in 2017 is believe all women. See, a lot of these things have been around for a while and they've been used to control your brain. Okay. So just think about that. The rise of rape culture narrative. Hopefully, YouTube does not pick up what I just said. Grapes, I said, grapes. The rise in that, okay? And that fruit grape culture narrative. Okay, that narrative. Um, you had like pop culture music like the feminist punk movement, Riot Girl and Spice Girls, and girl power, right? That empowerment marketing to kids. That's what Spice Girls were. And now, of course, it's evolved into stuff like Cardi B and rappers who sound like men who exploit men and rap about it. But that's not what we got, right? Rappers with bigger wieners than fucking dudes. You know what I mean? Like, pretty much. At least they sound like it, or they try to, you know. During this period, reclaiming the slut identity and sex positivity and early advocacy for sex work. So women were in the feminist movement were advocating for prostitution, advocating for that stuff, which now led to the OnlyFans creators that we have today. Hollywood media stereotypes. I mean, this is the 90s is where you had this stupid, incompetent dad, sitcom dad. That happened in the 90s, right? And the smarter, more capable, dominant woman. And that was just crammed into the social narrative, right? And it was, it's funny, haha, okay? And that's what that was. And you could be canceled or ostracized if you presented, and still today, if you present the woman as this idiot, this bumbling fool, and the guy is the smart, capable, dominant guy. You know what I mean? Presenting a good husband in comedy and sitcoms and movies was not popular in the 90s, right? A dominant man was an abuser. That was a presentation in media, in entertainment. The new message for the third wave is women don't just need to be equal to men. Women don't just need to be in the workplace and have equality and autonomy. Women, the new narrative for the third wave is that men must be controlled, bypassed, or replaced. So the third wave feminism, the narrative is, and the propaganda is men must be controlled, bypassed, or replaced. Because men are not competent, men are not trustworthy, men are abusers, masculinity is bad. In the academia and the psychological world, you had an acceleration of researchers, claiming that men and masculinity leads to all these bad outcomes, that sort of thing, right? And so that was the acceleration of that during the third wave. All right. Sexual rebellion and promiscuity became normalized. So prior to that, like the 80s was kind of a promiscuous time, but it wasn't really a feminist time either. The feminism took a little bit of a break between 80 and 90. Okay. Little bit. It was kind of like, a free for all, it's kind of like a Jordan Belfort party in the 90s or 80s. But by the time you got to the 90s, promiscuity wasn't just a thing that happened. Like in the 60s, you had the sexual revolution, and some people, it was like counterculture considered, sexual freedom, sexual revolution, and promiscuity as like freedom, right? Or way but there was a counterculture. You were like a hippie, or you were like in a niche. Do you know what I mean? Mainstream did not consider promiscuity a form of liberation. By the 90s, promiscuity for all women, that was liberation. 90s, 2000s, right? You would be shamed as a man for calling a girl out for being a slut. You were slut shaming. The word slut shaming, that happened around this time. Okay, so this is where promiscuity became normalized. Again, promiscuity has always existed, and it was in socially it existed into just these countercultures, but now it's a normal thing. Now, in fact, you're less of a woman if you don't explore your sexuality. That idea happened in the 90s and 2000s, right? That you're actually less of a woman. So this is now the bigger lie that feminism says. Instead of being, keeping your body count low, having a meaningful relationship, having the ability to neurologically bond with a guy that you're in love with, team up with that guy, have a household and have success, right? Instead of that being the narrative, the propaganda became, if you do that, you're somehow weaker. You're subservient to a man. You're less of a woman. You're a slave to a man versus free, right? And if you're not sexually liberated and hoeing around, then somehow you're also less of a woman. You're not experiencing and exploring your sexuality. The myth that women who had low body counts, who were faithful to their husbands, were bad at sex. That was a myth there. All right, that got promoted. The reality is a lot of people are bad at sex, including 304s. A lot of 304s are terrible at sex. Just a reality. Okay. People are having bad sex out there. That's what's going on. That's why when I coach guys, part of the seduction process is learning how to put it down, right? Because you don't want to be in a relationship and have somebody be faithful to you and be having a bad sexual experience with you. That's not good. Okay. So that's part of the training. All right. Because people are not trained, men or women, they're not trained on being good at sex. They think they are because they watch porn and they try to mimic something they saw in pornography, but they're not. Okay, so that's reality about that. But the myth is that, it's a sexually liberated woman. She's better in the bedroom, even. You know what I mean? Anyways, and then that's the powerful thing. Okay, so men were expected to submit, comply, and praise a woman's sexuality and sexual behavior during the 90s and 2000s. This is that third wave. Women's empowerment now evolved into being sexually free, to exploit sexuality for power, and then to punish men for responding. Again, that's that selective empowerment paradox, where we are going to embrace their sexuality, be sluts, but then shame men for responding to our 304 behavior, right? That's the new thing. And then we enter into the internet. Internet shows up. Okay, we're in the 90s and the early 2000s, and it accelerates into the fourth wave, and that gets interesting. But internet created global connectivity now for feminists and feminism. And so now they could stage protests, swap ideology and more influence, society. You had the political groups that would do that, but understand all of this is helpful to the powers at be. This is keeping people fighting in the system, right? It's not solving the problems. You had dating apps, online pornography, social media, in the sexual marketplace, right? So we're getting into the sexual marketplace turning global. So we enter into a global sexual marketplace during the third wave and then continuing into the fourth wave. Sexual marketplace used to be women had options in men based on their geography or location. The internet opened it up to the entire world. So you have promiscuity, exploring sexuality as being seen as a premium for female liberation. Add that to the internet, where now they can do that all over the world. Now you have a promiscuity problem, which transforms even more during the fourth phase. But now during this time, there's a promiscuity problem. It's such a problem, in fact, that we don't even know how much of a problem it is, because the research will not catch up to the behavior of women over the last 25 years, because the social narrative will shame academics for trying to research this, not allow them to publish, not sponsor their research. So all we have is this old or terrible or poorly done studies on, what notch counts are in sexual behavior. We do not have an accurate portrayal of the sexual behavior of women from the 2000s into today, because the sexual global marketplace accelerated promiscuity to such a degree that people don't even believe it. People can't even believe that we went from an average of a woman in her 30s having 4, 5, 6 to maybe average of, 6 to 7 bodies, right? Average woman, in her 30s slept with 6 or 7 people in her life. People can't believe that there's high percentages of women, maybe even a majority, who've slept with 20, 30, 50 people. Some women into the hundreds. We don't even know how to accumulate that data. All right? Because the internet conceals the sexual behavior of men and women. So the internet, you promote promiscuity as liberation, then open up a global sexual marketplace that conceals your behavior from the rest of everybody else. We don't even know what that data is. We don't know. Maybe the average number of sex partner for 25-year-olds is 50 people. I don't think it is, but maybe it is. Maybe it's 30. Maybe it's only 10. We don't know. And then it's, of course, there's target groups. You have female incels, and then, so if we take them out, what are the numbers, right? What's the median? I mean, we don't know. We can guess. I've made that determination in other videos, but that's how it's become. Okay. So that was what the third wave brought. Now we know that promiscuity does not promote long-term relationships later on. It conditions the brain to have short-term relationships and to discard those relationships versus become bonded to a person you're with and have the motivation to want to make that relationship last long-term. So we know for a fact that promiscuity correlates with poor outcomes in long-term relationships. Now we have high divorces, high rates of people getting married. I've done previous videos demonstrating that 86% of people will fail in marriage. 86%. Okay. Well, there's only at best, the best numbers would be a 14% success rate in marriage now. It was different numbers. Okay. 75 years ago. All right. So that's where we're at. Okay. Third wave, civil rights were done, economic access, that was there, right? So the logic became to defeat the patriarchy, got to weaponize sex and shame men simultaneously. So this area cemented hostility among genders, sexualization as a weapon, and it solidified that selective empowerment double standard. Okay. And there was more of a cultural degradation of men that you saw from the 90s up until now. All right. And this transitions us into the next phase. Now, I'm going to take a pause here to look at my things, look at my chat. All right. So we got something to say. Let me know. Hey, thanks, man. Cool. I appreciate it. Maybe I look good today. All right. Thank you. I'm glad you like the shaved head. It seems to be working out for me. I don't know why I would debate somebody that is retarded. No, okay. Like if that's what I don't know who she is. Okay. But if she's an idiot, why would I debate her? It's a waste of my time. Some of these debates are stupid because they end up wasting your time. I'm all good for collabing with somebody though, and having a conversation with someone who disagrees with me. But I have to know it's going to turn into a productive conversation or something worth watching, or else I'm not going to do it. This is a good comment here. I think they overblow how bad it was for women in general because there were all kinds of powerful women throughout history. I agree. If they were suppressed as bad as they make it out to be, there wouldn't be any. Yeah. Yeah, no, it is overblown. That's part of that narrative. All right, cool. Thanks for the $2, man. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. If you have a comment or a question, some problem you need to be solved, and you throw in a little super like this, right? I'll notice it. I won't bypass it, even accidentally, right? So that's just something. It helps support the channel too, helps algorithmically. So I appreciate it. T Diamond with, I was told that being a stay-at-home mom was lazy and no ambition. Yep. Right. That was the narrative. Yep. And still some people believe that today. I was born in the 90s and became legal in 2010. All I knew was the bullshit. Yeah. That's right. That's what you're told. That keeps you a prisoner. That all that this is it keeps you in unhappy relationships and adversarial relationships with men, right? If you follow that narrative, and it keeps you miserable and it keeps you unhappy. That's what it's designed to do, because miserable people spend more money. Okay, cool. That's good enough. No offense, plumber. I don't want to get into Sydney Sweeney right now. So we're gonna go now. We're gonna step back now a little bit before we enter the fourth wave. We want to understand how marriage and divorce changed across feminist eras. All right. Because family structure is the battlefield where feminism has done the most damage. So I'm going to blow through this. Okay. The 1950s, you had fault-based divorce and traditional roles. So marriage was seen as a team structure where you had a male provider and a female homemaker. In the court system, that was the assumption. Divorce was socially unacceptable and rare in the 1950s. Okay. You had to prove reason for a divorce back then. It wasn't just, you can just do it. All right. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just the way it was. Women were economically dependent on the husbands, but they were part of that team. Okay. And that the success or failure of that relationship determined the success or failure of the lives of those individuals. The courts assumed that the male was a breadwinner and the female was the caregiver. So the default outcomes were that women automatically got custody of in a divorce. So 1950s, women automatically got custody, and alimony was pretty much the standard back then. Okay. So divorce was more rare, but if there was a divorce, women got paid and they had kept the kids. And under that structure, it made sense. But fault mattered, right? So if a wife cheated on a dude and neglected the marriage, she could lose that alimony and lose kids too. So there were consequences that you could prove in court. And that accountability existed back then. All right. And so what having no fault divorce, or rather fault, having a fault-based divorce meant that accountability to some degree did exist. Women, again, tended to got the alimony, tended to got the children. The men weren't resistant as much as they are today in paying that either. And there's a reason men are resistant in that today. Okay, because it's an unfair system now. But back then, it was just understood, if I'm going to divorce, and it kept people financially imprisoned into a marriage for sure. I mean, there's a lot of bad outcomes there, but it's just the way it was, right? Harder to divorce, but protections did exist because wives were financially tied to the husbands. Okay. 1969 into 1980, that's the no fault divorce era now. So 1969, California introduces no fault divorce. By 1980, nationwide policy. So divorce is no longer needed as proof or fault. I'm unhappy becomes the legal exit. So women are just unhappy and they can leave. Okay. Now a woman has access to work and income, but the courts keep the old assumptions. So the courts still assumed, up until now, even in a lot of courts, judges in the family courts still assume that this husband is the default payer and the wife is still the default caretaker and beneficiary, even though women are now competing in the workplace. Okay. Back to that paradox again, the selective paradox, right? Men could not contest divorce or prove betrayal in order to protect his assets. So a woman could cheat and leave you and a guy couldn't do anything about it. And the courts would decide child support, alimony, whatever. All right. So the result was women gained a unilateral exit button. All right. And then that was backed by financial guarantees, and men could only comply. And we still have that today. This is why marriage is a bad deal for men. Okay. Financially, economically, it can be a bad deal. All right. I'm not telling you not to get married, but I'm just saying. All right. Women gained a unilateral exit button. and then they got financial guarantees by pressing it. All right. That's where this went. And that's affected by and pushed by the feminist movement. 80s and 90s, we have the child support state. So the best interest of the child replaced all the prior standards. And custody was no longer guaranteed to mothers. This is a good thing, but still it was overwhelmingly favored to them and still is. Alimony did decline, okay, between 80s and 90s, but child support system expanded dramatically, and child support became automated and aggressively enforced and punitive towards fathers. All right. Um, for better or for worse, right? There's good and bad there. So this birthed a state of enforced fatherhood taxed. Okay. This benefits the state. All right. This benefits, there's less resources the state has to pay for when a guy is forced to pay. Right. It benefits the system once again, and it enslaves father. Having an enslaved father that has to work two jobs is better for the system than it is for that man. Right. So that's what you have. Selective empowerment surfaces its ugly head. Women gain independence without being independent of financial consequences. Men are financially punished, even if and often left without custody. Right. So, all right. So during the third wave of feminism, you had the rise of single motherhood. All right. And a cultural normalization of promiscuity. I don't need a man, independence through state or male subsidization. I don't need a man. I'm a single mom. Pay me. Right. Child support is framed as supporting the children, not subsidizing lifestyle choices, when the reality is it's often subsidizing a lifestyle choice. The economic reality is that we incentivized single motherhood by the third wave of feminism and rewarded women for exiting the family structure. Okay. So that's what happened and is still happening in marriage and families. All right. And so plays a major role. All right. Which puts us into the fourth wave. And that's institutionalized single motherhood. That's what we're in now. Okay. Single motherhood and this is after 2010. All right. But single motherhood becomes normalized and celebrated. Feminist messaging reframed the father as absent, and an absent father and a single mom as empowering for a woman. Okay. The courts still default to maternal custody. Men are still overwhelmingly the payers, and women rarely pay even when the father has custody. Freedom for women meant obligation for men enforced by law. All right. So where we're at now is more men are starting to get custody and child support now, but it is still more rare. Family court has a lot of outdated assumptions and a lot of feminist cultural pressure. Remember, most of these judges are political figures and they need to get elected or keep their positions and whatever. And so the cultural political pressures are there for them and influences their decisions. Society shifts from marriage as a team. So if you're tracking now, society shifted from marriage as a team to marriage as a temporary contract to parenthood as a financial liability for men. Okay. So marriage is a potential catastrophic financial liability for a man, which is why marriage is generally not good for men. What marriage is good, though, to protect women and protect families and children. So as a man, you kind of have to decide which way you want to go there and figure out how to protect yourself along the way. All right. So I'm not against marriage per se, but I'm not for it either when it comes to the systemic problems. So you have to decide. And for you, by the way, if you come to my community, you're a guy, you want to do good in life. I have Christian men that come to my community who want to be good husbands. I have guys who are more secular, who just want to have a good life and don't feel like getting married. And I give you the skills to do whatever you want to do. All right. Outside of this, it's not social conditioning is what you need to break free from. And you decide what you want to do. But understand though, systemically, structurally, not a good deal for men to get married because of what feminism has done. All right. So this matters going into now the discussion about the fourth wave because feminism did not remove female dependency. It just transferred the provider role from husband to the state and to child support systems. All right. So we weakened marriage. Family incentives are now inverted. Fatherhood becomes a financial risk, and single motherhood is now industrialized. This is all great for large corporate economic interests. The healthcare industry, the housing industry, right? The consumer product industry, all those things. This is great for them. Okay. Not good for you when you're a slave, right? A single mom who has to work a job that she doesn't like in order to pay her bills, who can't trust a man, is being a slave. All right. It's not the definition of freedom. Okay. Feminism did not give you the freedom that it promised under this structure. Okay. And a guy who gets married, divorced, has to be a slave to the family court and doesn't make enough money to get out of it and can't figure that out. That guy is not winning. That guy is a slave to the system. Right. So this is what this did because they don't care about you. All right. They care about your compliance. They, being whoever's in charge, cares about doing what they can do to have you comply to benefit the system as a whole. It's not against you personally because you're not that important. They don't give a shit. Okay. It's all about the collective and your personal happiness and individual freedom is what you need to focus on, not trying to be part of not to be a slave benefiting a collective, right? And so, yep. Take a breather here for a second. We're about to segue. We're almost finished. All right. We're getting into now. Fourth wave. Once marriage was weakened and the family was destabilized, the fourth wave took over. All right. This era, again, is not about equality. All right. Now, we're not about equality anymore. This started around 2010-ish, and it's going on into present. And it's converting again with AI and stuff. And I'll get into that in a minute. But, all right, we're getting into another wave, guys. Isn't that interesting? I don't know when we won't know when it started until a few years from now when somebody who really researches this shit comes up with when they think it started. All right. But with AI, we're actually in a new era, I believe. But we'll get into that. All right. So this is not about equality. Again, never really was. It was about power. It was about transferring resources. Okay. And if you are a feminist and you really believe in that stuff and all this, I'm not saying the principles like freedom and rights for everyone and some of those things, that's good, right? It's not bad. Women should have rights and freedoms to choose what they want to do with their lives. I believe in that too. But that's not what feminism is, and that's not what it's done. All right. And so just keep that in mind. Okay. That, I mean, you can still have your values that align with some of the things you like, but understand that this is what's really going on. Okay. And so now we get into, okay, control, victim politics, and algorithm powered gender warfare, which I am in, by the way. I am in, unfortunately, because I help people have healthy relationships. That is counter to the culture. Do you understand? Healthy relationships is counter to the culture we're in. It does not support the system, which is why I'm algorithmically suppressed. I'm going to spend 2 hours on this video. It's going to fucking go nowhere except for to you guys. Thank God, right? It's going to go to a select small amount of people who will hopefully benefit. It's not going to get scaled out, even though it should, right? Now we can bust through that algorithmic problem with your help, the like, the subscribe, and all that. I urge you to do it. Okay, we got to fight as much as we can. But right now, that's where we're in. Okay, it's algorithmic suppression, which is why I get annoyed at some of my friends who don't believe in it. You're fucking wrong. And I'm smarter than you. So shut the fuck up and listen to me. I'm talking to you, friends. You know who you are. All right. All right. Ready for the fourth wave? Let's do it. Okay. So digital feminism. That's where we're at now. Sexual economic collapse, identity politics, and technological gender power struggles. All right. So when it began was around 2010 to 2012, and it's still ongoing. All right. This wave is a digital amplification of the first three waves. We're now scaling these ideas globally through technology in ways that we didn't before. Okay. These defining characteristics are the global sexual marketplace with the internet and dating apps. So that accelerated around 2010. So promiscuity was created as a value for women, a value to have to be promiscuous in the 90s, right? And now you're somehow there's something wrong with you if you don't go through a 304 phase, right? And now we get into dating apps and internet scales promiscuity, you see. Digital activism, social media mob dynamics, okay? Right? So now social media, Reddit chats, all that stuff becomes a resource for extremist views, okay? Power narratives, harassment, all right, assault, patriarchy stuff, right? Fighting against all that. Intersectionality, all right, as a part of their doctrine. Race, gender identity, sexuality, disability, class, all this stuff, all right? Consent culture, bodily autonomy rhetoric. This is corporate backed feminism. This is what this is. Cancel culture and online public shaming. This is corporate backed feminism. And by the way, the Republicans and the right, they're doing now cancel culture and online public shaming too. If you're paying attention to the recent stuff with Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, and all that, there's a call for cancel culture there among the right. So they're not better, just FYI, when it comes to some of these things. They're still existing in the system. And many of the people who have conservative values aren't unplugged, unfortunately. Okay. This is why I'll never be that popular. I can't comfortably be a part of one of these tribes and just fucking parrot what they do. It doesn't work. I'm okay with that though. Okay. So the broken promises of feminism comes to a head. Since the first wave of feminism promised economic autonomy, less suffering, better life, right? So that was the first wave. The promise was that economic autonomy and equality means you're not going to suffer and you're going to have a better life. But the reality proved that that is not true. Okay. Life is hard, even if you have rights and even if you have opportunities. Life's still fucking hard, guys. This is what, if you are in identity politics, if you're in a minority group, if you feel like you're being oppressed, especially now in 2025, let me tell you, got news for you. Okay. If you feel like you're being oppressed, guess what? Join the club of everybody, because everybody deals with something in some way, and life is still fucking hard, particularly when you're down here and you're see what I'm doing. When you're in the slave to the system, blah, whatever. Okay. Life is hard there. If you're not in control or in charge, or if you have not figured out how to make some money and benefit from the system, to step out of it, right? To run your own life. Life's hard for you. Doesn't matter what your color is. Doesn't matter your racial background. Doesn't matter your gender or your gender identity. That's the reality of it. All right. But that's not the story that's being told. Feminism expected freedom from suffering, but they gained new suffering instead. Work stress, family instability, not being able to achieve their family goals, their life goals, dating, and sexual chaos. Dating is horrible for women. We talk about on my channel how dating is horrible for men because women are so terrible sometimes, and statistically speaking. But really, dating's horrible for everybody. Dating is horrible for fucking women right now. Women can't find a masculine guy to save her life. You know what I mean? Why would a woman trust a man today, considering how many simps and losers there are? You know what I mean? And I'm not talking about you personally if you're not that guy. Hopefully you're in my community and you're not that guy. But you understand, we're guys who have their shit together, we're a small percentage. You know what I mean? It's chaos out there. Emotional burnout, isolation, anxiety, medication for psychological problems, rising depression. Does that sound like empowerment? Well, that's where we've been, entering into the fourth wave. Equality didn't fix them. Sexual empowerment, reproductive control did not fix women. Independence and power did not fix women, okay, or men for that matter. All right. So feminism had to escalate. And it's the narrative again. The problem isn't your life and the fact that you're not successful because you don't know what to do and you need to figure that out. The problem is that men still have the power in other ways that are systemic and secretive. And we need to suss that out and take that power away from men. All right. So, first wave was equality under the law and more equal rights. Second wave was equality in economy and in work. Third wave was sexual power over men and selective victimhood. Now into the fourth wave and probably have left it into a new era, but where we're using technology to gain total dominance and punish men socially, legally, and digitally. That's where we're at now. We have fully moved into gynocentric social control. We've done that through there's deplatforming, character assassinations, mass accusation, gender-based social punishment, and there's corporate and state alignment. This benefits the system we're in to those who are in charge. Okay. The global sexual marketplace, you got the dating apps, instant mating access. Women can bang the chads and the top, percentages of good looking guys that will meet with them, and they could bang them in secret and not tell their future husbands about it. Right. Women gain unprecedented sexual choice, but with no localized accountability. So you have these extremes that emerge. Now you have extremes now into this fourth wave. So you have some women, because we're getting into a fifth wave, and I'll explain that. But we have some women who are withdrawing and opting out of the sexual marketplace entirely. Okay. This is with AI boyfriends that exists, porn, toys, digital intimacy, and parasocial relationships. So there's a segment of women, higher segments of women who are female incels who avoid men outside of the internet altogether. Okay. They collect simps, maybe. They have little internet relationships, but they're not having sex. They're not having real relationships. They're certainly not getting married. Marriage rates have gone down exponentially. So divorce rates are what they are, but marriage, the percentages of people not even getting married has gone up. The percentages of women checking out of the sexual marketplace now, that's gone up tremendously, especially among young people. So we had this rampant promiscuity, but since the fourth wave getting into 2025, now you have two segmented groups: hyper promiscuous women and then total withdrawal from the dating market. Female incel and withdraw, bang everybody, go through a hoe phase. That's now what we have. Hyper promiscuity, high volume of sexual activity, rotational dating. Women have guys on rotation, hookup culture, industrialized, online attention, online. How many women are selling their bodies? Online prostitution, selling content, selling their bodies, selling pictures of themselves, selling intimacy, which all fuels narcissism and competition. We have internet and social media based psychopathy and narcissism now that we didn't have 20 years ago. People exhibit narcissistic and psychopathic traits due to their social media behavior alone, not because of genetic predispositions and other reasons someone might become a psychopath or a narcissist. Social media behavior alone has fueled that behavior among women and men. All right. Never before in human history has sexual behavior shifted this fast and this globally. And the research cannot even keep up. Can't keep up. All right. We also have LGBTQ and trans activism. That's an interesting thing because while that was going on, it's separate from the feminist movement, but there's a shared enemy. The shared enemy is white male oppression. Okay. So the left narrative is that there's this oppressor and the oppressor looks kind of like me. All right. Like a white guy somewhere, except maybe I have $1 billion, you know what I mean? And I'm just out here oppressing everybody with my oppression. All right. And so apparently I'm oppressing some guy who looks like me, maybe not like me because I'm kind of have a lot of muscle on me. So a skinnier, less fit version of me, okay, is out there controlling the world with billions of dollars and suppressing women and also suppressing the gay community and LGBTQ, right? So that's the narrative. And so that shared narrative created alignment between feminism and the LGBTQ community because of the systematic victimhood narrative. But then the contradiction hits because you back to the paradox, right? If gender is a social construct, that became now the narrative for a lot of people. Well, if gender is a social construct, then how are women oppressed as a biological class by the patriarchy? See, those two things can't exist at the same time. So now you have this paradox once again, you know, stop looking at me now. Here's my tits, right? Like that's the right. That paradox, right? So this created, and you see now an internal conflict with the trans women in sports thing and biological women feeling overshadowed in some feminist spaces and feminist ideology colliding with its own logic. So you have some feminists who are like not okay with all the trans stuff, and then some people who are, and there's a little bit of a conflict going on there. I'm not going to go down that trans road here. It's not that important for this topic as much, but that's what's going on as well during this fourth wave. And so we do see a resurgence of masculinity, manosphere, red pill stuff in the 2017 era to about right around COVID. Now it's been on a decline because of all the grifters. All right. But that's where that happened too, in order to fight back against, the feminist ideology. So toxic masculinity, that became a term during the fourth wave. So this area weaponizes this toxic masculinity idea. Masculinity needs to be defined, redefined. That infiltrates the academic circles, the APA putting out memorandums saying that traditional masculinity is a precursor to mental health problems, for example, and trying to redefine masculinity. We got to redefine masculinity. Okay, so the gynocentric social order has taken full control over masculine identity at a social scale and is trying to redefine everything. Men have to be softer, quieter, more controlled, and more submissive, and submissive to female moral authority. So that's what is the ideology now that is happening in the fourth wave. All right. No masculine archetype is acceptable unless it serves a female empowerment narrative, according to fourth wave feminism. Okay. So the tools used are shaming. So you got a lot of public shaming and shaming of men. If you've noticed, that's been an accelerated thing over the last 20 years. Cancel culture, deplatforming. I'm going to show algorithmically how I get algorithmically suppressed. Now, to my very good friend who is helping me a lot in my digital marketing, he's a great friend there are a lot of things that I need to do that I am doing to boost my algorithmic presence and to fight through the algorithms. So I'm not behaving like a victim here. Okay. But there is algorithmic suppression. I will show you in a future video how that happens. I'm going to show you so that you see it, so you understand that it's happening, so that you can be more selective in what content you consume. All right. Because there's a way in which your ideas are getting manufactured for you. And as someone who does create content, by being more aware of how they do that, see, pretending it doesn't exist isn't going to help me be successful and get you guys more information. All right. I need to understand how my stuff can get suppressed so I can work within the limits to reach more people. That's the reason why I focus on, I talk about algorithmic suppression and shadow banning, because it is real, not in the way that some people say. Like if I still do a shitty thumbnail or title or have a poorly produced video, it's not going to get reach. And that's my problem, my error, correct? Right. But there are things that I might do and say or present or do certain things that hits the algorithms in a different way, and then they suppress my content. And I have to know that that's happening. And I have to know what those things are in order to get around it. Okay. Pretending it doesn't exist and saying, oh, it's just me, I'm the problem, doesn't help me overcome the problem. All right. So, and it doesn't help you guys make better decisions on what you're consuming, because you understand here, right? They need your fucking compliance. Okay. They need your compliance to keep you a slave. And they do that through suppression of content and expansion of other content. All right. Things that fit a social narrative, that get marketed to become popular, get pushed out more than other less popular ideas. And it takes a very talented digital marketer or someone with a really cool niche or idea to break through that suppression. Like, for example, a guy like Homath has those little drawings he does, and it's very entertaining to watch, and he does great content that way. That was a way for him to break through algorithmic suppression, so it can be done, but that as a content creator, you have to learn how to do that, and you have to know that it exists. For you guys who are watching, who are not creators, which is most of you, you need to understand this is happening because it's part of this propaganda campaign to skew your ideas. If you're a new person who came to my channel who is a feminist or something like that, right, or still is, you're listening to this, understand your ideas are being manufactured for you. I'm not telling you to change your mind. I'm telling you to understand what's happening so that you can be more selective in the things that you're choosing to consume. All right. Because that's what's being done now. That's what the battleground is digital. The battleground is digital for the fourth wave of feminism. All right. Deplatforming, cancel culture, accusation culture, accusing people, corporate and HR weaponization. How about firing people, right, for their ideas? Okay. Social media and moral enforcement. This is algorithmic enforcement is the weapon for the fourth wave. Okay. So to summarize again, fourth wave is we've industrialized victimhood. We've the technological expansion of social and sexual power, the punishment of masculinity as an ideology, and the attempts to finalize gynocentric power structures. That's what's happening in the fourth wave. All right. And it is failing women for the same reason every wave has failed before it. You cannot eliminate suffering by suppressing or eliminating men. You cannot create empowerment by attacking another target group who's also not empowered, right? Masculinity. Okay. Masculinity is not in charge of anything. All right. The patriarchy isn't a thing that exists. It's not real. You can't engineer happiness through ideology and resentment and fighting people who are also slaves. All right. Doesn't work. The result here is not female liberation. The result is social fragmentation, relationship destruction, dating collapse, family breakdown, and an emotional crisis for everybody, men and women. All right. Now, I'm not going to say much on it because we have to see how it pans out, but AI is entering us into a new era. We're already in it now. We're in an era where we could call it the era feminism. If we're going to give feminism a fifth wave and classify it, I think it'll be classified as loneliness. The fifth wave of feminism is going to be classified or characterized as a loneliness epidemic. Men have a loneliness epidemic, and now women are catching up because we've destroyed relationships so badly with this ideology to promote consumerism and a tax base for those who are in charge. Okay. We're now into an era where it's all destroyed. And so, and now we have AI tools and technology replacing. So the fourth wave was controlling men. All right. And complete suppression and control over men. The fifth wave is going to be replacing them through technology and AI. That's where the fifth wave. The fifth wave will be a replacement, a total replacement of women, a total replacement of men. And then we're going to watch the birth rates crumble and society further get buried. Okay. That's where we're going. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. It is what it is. All right. So feminism isn't leading to liberation, is it? It's leading to collapse. You pursue power instead of healthy relationships. You don't build a better world. You break the one you're in and you become more of a slave. Okay. Feminism has benefit. So I have to ask you, has feminism benefited society? What do you think? Tell me in the comments. Or has it broken society? So I'm going to conclude with this. All right. Feminism is what I would call a devil's gift. It's a gift that is wrapped and arrives and it's wrapped in virtue and noble intentions, yet it delivers just total destruction and decay once it's opened. All right. It promised freedom, delivered fragmentation. It promised empowerment, it delivered dependency. All right. Not on a husband or a home, but on now a system and becoming a slave to a system that you can't afford financially. Women have to subsidize their sexuality to afford things, still living off the backs of men and pretending that they're not. Now, this is usually, I'm at the end, I'm at a conclusion now. This is what I'm supposed to say. Let me list all the good things feminism did and why. Oh, it had good intentions, but it's bad. All right, I'm not going to fucking do that. I'm not. I'm not going to do the ritualized apology that I'm supposed to do as a man telling you the truth. Okay? Because the truth is much simpler. Treating women as an oppressed class who needed a gender crusade was never necessary from day one of phase one. Never necessary. I'm not saying women didn't need rights, but the movement itself, not needed. Why? Because we didn't need feminism. We needed just human dignity, equal treatment under law, enhanced opportunity for all people, regardless of race and gender. Nothing more. That's all we needed. We already had the abolition of slavery into equal rights movements and civil rights movements, which were much needed. Needed those civil rights movements. Feminism on top of it, not a necessary thing. We just we didn't need a movement specifically for women to then be propagandized and used to destroy women. All right. That doesn't make much sense, does it? Have a thing to help women that ultimately destroys them and we propagandize it otherwise. That's not productive. Okay. Just a movement to offer and pressure on those in charge of the system to create an environment where we have more economic opportunity for all people, right? And we have more fair opportunity, fair treatment under the law. And people are treated with dignity. That's all. That's all you needed. Okay. Because now we have a situation where men and certain racial groups, depending on what's going on, okay, are treated without dignity. We systematically and habitually treat people without dignity. Men treat women without dignity. Men don't respect women. Women don't respect men. It's a fucking mess. That's what feminism and division does versus why don't we just treat each other like people? Why don't we just treat each other with respect, regardless of what your race or gender is? That's all we needed. Didn't need all these waves of destruction. Okay. People suffer. Women suffered in the 1900s. Men suffered in the 1900s. Everyone who wasn't part of this elite class of beneficiaries, okay, remember, okay, the elite class, everybody suffered to some degree. All right. People need to learn to navigate the system that we're in order to learn how to benefit in a benevolent way so you're not harming others. Because ultimately harming others can lead to your demise as well, right? So that's what people need to do, not create an enemy that doesn't exist and fight something that's not there and still be a slave. That doesn't make much sense, right? The problem is never the patriarchy, it's never men. And guys who y'all watch me, the problem isn't women either. Okay, if that's your thing, if you're sitting there going Western women today and the problem is women, because that's the other side of it, I would probably be more popular if I was like this MGTOW. No offense to my MGTOW guys, but more of a black pill, all women suck kind of a thing. That would be more divisive. Maybe it'd be more popular, but it's just not true. And if you're involved in that, you're still a slave. You're imprisoned. If you're a black pilled guy, you are in a prison. If you're an extreme, like, it's not really red pill, but people who claim red pill, but they're really just extreme in their ideology where, they're just so unfavorable against women, you're actually part of that. You're still in a little bit of a prison mentally, psychologically. All right. To think that's the problem, that all women are that way and that you can't have healthy relationships. That is the thing. You're falling right into the hands of those who are promoting this destructive narrative. If you're on the other side and an anti-feminist who is also anti-relationships, anti-women, right? You're falling in line with a destruction. You're just on the other side. You're still participating, not just in the destruction, but your own demise. You're still enslaved by this ideology. You see what I'm saying? You're not free. The problem has always been when those in charge of a system can propagandize people into compliance rather than serve them. That's always been the thing. Okay. You can only really promote a system that serves its people by maintaining individual liberties and rights, the things that this nation in the United States was built on that we've forgotten about. Okay. Those principles that we built this nation on and that system of government that's designed to protect the rights of the individual. That is how you can best ensure that we check and balance the people who are in charge so we don't create a system of slavery through propaganda. In the United States, we like to criticize Russia and China for this, and they are more extreme than we are, but we are catching up. We're catching up to China, to Russia with our propaganda machine and keeping people ignorant, dumb, and enslaved. And that's what will lead to our collapse as a nation if we don't fight against that and fix that. We're still better in the US than most places. And I stand behind that, but that is maybe rapidly going away. I don't know where we'll be in 20 years. And that's a real concern. Okay. So feminism was not about women versus men. It was always about controlling everybody. All right. And keeping people fighting. All right. It told women that men are your enemy. And then men learned by the divisive nature of that ideology that women are the problem when everybody's the fucking problem. Actually, nobody is innocent here. Okay. While we fight each other and people continue to be stupid and not listen to smart people and not see through the ideological traps, not unplug from the social conditioning. All right. Everybody's marching, everybody's part of the same machine, regardless of whether you're left or right, feminist, anti-feminist, supporting of, LGBTQ or not supporting whatever race, doesn't matter. You're all part of the same shit that keeps you enslaved, right? So, and meanwhile, the system continues to recruit more workers, tax more labor, offer less and expect more, dissolve families, creating loneliness, unstable people, mentally, emotionally unstable, weak men, right? Weak men and emotionally unstable and insufferable women, all for the means of you consuming more, buying more shit you don't need, becoming more reliant on the government, and building nothing that will last other than a means for you to escape through technology, which is where AI and creating another world for you to live in your head instead of exist in the objective world. Okay. That's the only thing we're creating is more ways of escaping, more drugs, more fantasy, more bullshit. Feminism didn't liberate women. It liberated the system we live in now from family. It liberated us from unity. It liberated us from men and women getting along. It liberated us from stability. And it liberated you from having a good relationship with a loved one. It eliminated you, or liberated you rather, from love. Because stable families, they don't need big government. They don't need to spend money on Amazon carts and Walmart and everything else. By the way, two stores I very support. I support Amazon and Walmart, but I don't buy frivolous shit every day over there. Okay. Unstable people do. All right. Unstable families, they get to check out from that system. They don't create as much taxes. They're not spending as much money. Secure women don't need to enter, to be constantly brainwashed. Grounded men don't need to be shamed into doing whatever the behavior is. It'll make them a good boy. You see what I mean? But broken people, lonely people, emotionally and psychologically unstable people, isolated people, scrolling. I don't know where my phone is. This is gonna, oh, here we go. Scrolling on their device. I don't know. That's good for effect, right? Isolated people scrolling on their devices, right? Medicating themselves, emptiness, distraction, drugs, alcohol, escaping into social media, internet, video games, bullshit, escaping the sexual marketplace, living inside your digital fantasies. You all are the perfect consumers and the perfect fucking slaves, the perfect subjects. So what's the way out? Log off. That's the way out. Log off. Have real relationships. Have real communication with people. I mean, granted, my community is still logged on to something, but you're actually talking to real people there, not avatars on the internet. Okay, it's a closer relationship. Even on a coaching call, we get on a Zoom call and we talk to each other like human beings, right? Log off, go for a walk, spend some time in nature, work out, exercise, have a community, meet real people. Okay, raise children if you want to raise your children. That's the way out. Create an environment around yourself that is an oasis from the dystopian digital nightmare that everybody else lives in. And stop fucking fighting people who are slaves just like you. Reject feminism, reject some extremist manosphere bullshit, reject anti-resentment of any of racial groups, whether it's Jews or Muslims or blacks or whites or whatever. Okay, reject all that crap because you're just part of the system. Okay, being mentally enslaved. Reject the narratives that turn men and women into enemies and competitors versus members of the same team. Stop being a pawn in somebody else's propaganda Okay. Grab your fucking balls and stop being weak and unplug from this shit. Choose partnerships, with business partners, choose relationships that are real relationships. Okay. Choose creating things and creating a life for yourself over consuming endlessly things you don't need and bullshit just to escape your miserable lives. Choose sovereignty over ideology that's designed to keep you trapped. Build the life that you want. Okay. Build a life with your own values, your own relationships, your own purpose. All right. You want a revolution? Do it with your own life and yourself. Be your own revolution. Create your own oasis. And that's not an anti-woman thing or an anti-man thing. It's a revolution based on not being manipulated, anti-propaganda, and ultimately anti-slavery, whether economic, digital, psychological, or emotional slavery. Be anti that. Be sovereign. Be fucking plugged in. Be awake and build a life for yourself that means something, because the only true rebellion, you want to rebel from a system that you don't like, the only true rebellion is to live your life on your terms, not on the socially conditioned terms that are not meant to serve you. All right. Thanks for sticking around. Take care.